Welcome to the Knowledge Entrepreneurs Show, where we celebrate the innovators driving change in the education industry. At Edison OS, we've worked with over 500 knowledge entrepreneurs to turn their edtech ideas into profitable businesses. Hi, Steve. Welcome to the Knowledge Entrepreneur Show. Thanks so much for taking time out for this.
Thanks for asking me. Nice to be here.
My pleasure, Steve. Steve, my first question to you is generally, when SAT went digital and now the ACT is going to become enhanced ACT, it's going to go digital as well. What was your reaction to things going digital?
My first reaction was, why are they changing it? Because
Okay.
it seemed to be a working process as it was. It was much more transparent on paper than it is now. There were fewer chances for systematic problems, and there was a huge problem worldwide last Saturday in the SAT. So that certainly came to be true. That wouldn't have happened on paper, what happened on Saturday.
Right, right. So, well, you're referring to a few days back, so I don't think much has changed about the way you think about it, despite a year being passed.
I feel worse about it now.
Got it, Steve. And so it's quite a transition going from SAT to digital SAT for all the stakeholders involved. But from a test prep business point of view, what did you expect? What went as expected, and what has surprised you?
It's gone better than I expected
Okay,
because teaching it was something that kind of worried me because there weren't any manuals anymore. There was no more official prep guide. It was most of the materials for them to be effective should be digital. Like you don't want to practice for a digital test on paper,
right,
but
right.
at first that's what we were doing, and that's kind of what we were left with. And then along the way, we started using more of the College Board tests that were prepared, their Khan Academy materials that were in conjunction with College Board. And then eventually we paired up with a company called Test Innovators that has good practice problems, practice tests. And it actually has worked out really well as far as tutoring it online, I think has been easier once we got our footing.
Got it, Steve. Test innovators is what you use. And it's been a year now. Are you settled? Is test prep with digital SAT, or are you still grappling with things?
Still kind of getting used to things very recently. And again, because I'm not, in my teens or in my 20s, so I've never used Desmos,
Right.
the digital calculator, at all in my life, really, except when I would tutor students, they would use it. And it's not the kind of thing that I like. So that's another thing I didn't like about the digital was it allowed students to rely more on the calculator. But as I'm starting to look at more of the complicated problems, and I take the SAT myself, I realize that Desmos is, if it's available to you and I'm not teaching it to you, then I'm not doing my job because
Right,
my job is to
right.
make your scores go higher, not necessarily to make you better at math, although I would hope I'm doing both. So if there are certain problems where Desmos will get it done for you in 5 seconds instead of you doing it by hand over 2 minutes, I'm going to tell you use Desmos. It just makes sense.
Got it, Steve. And
You're being
yeah,
compared to everybody else worldwide. So if they're using it and you're not, you're putting yourself at a disadvantage. Even though you might be more mathematically talented than they are, the score sheet, the scoring machine, the algorithm, whatever's involved in getting your score out there doesn't know who's using Desmos, who's not using Desmos. You're not cheating. They've given it to you, so use it.
got it, Steve. You said Desmos is something that you haven't used in the past. So how much of a learning curve was it for you?
Still happening. Still happening for sure. And it's funny because my students will show me things every now and then, like you can do this, you can do that. But then when I take what one student showed me and I show it to another, they're like, "Oh my god, I didn't know you could do that." And I'm like, yeah, neither did I.
Right, got it. And there's another change, right? The way they score it in digital SAT, it's not, it's adaptive scoring. So,
Right.
uh, how's that? What's your reaction on that? People say it's too opaque. There's not much clarity.
None at all. It's none. Again, my thought on that was why. I don't understand what the need for the change was because to me, there's nothing safer, clearer, more obvious than everyone gets the same questions, everyone gets the same time limits, special accommodations notwithstanding, everyone gets the same playing field, and let's just see how many questions you get right, how many questions you get wrong. That to me is the best way to determine the score. So I don't understand why they decided to go with this adaptive and, like you said, very opaque. Nobody knows how it's being scored, especially after, again, this last Saturday. I'm going to keep dwelling on it. Students took 3 of their 4 modules and had their fourth module handed in for them automatically before they were done. So they've done 3/4 of the test. They deserve to see how they did on those 3/4, and then they should be allowed to take the fourth module whenever, really. I mean, if it's digital, let them take it whenever they want. But the College Board is being pretty unfair about the whole thing and not really offering any satisfactory solutions.
So, what exactly happened on Saturday, Steve?
So it was a pretty limited glitch, but it did affect, I think, thousands of students worldwide. And Vietnam, Pakistan, there was another country I heard, and obviously USA. And very, very close to my home, Conestoga High School, which is the one in Berwyn near Paoli. At least 4 of my students have told me that College Board knew there was going to be a glitch. Something about the way they programmed their Blue Book app let them know that if you don't log out by 11 a.m., this program will automatically end your test for you and submit your answers. So
Okay,
if you didn't start your test by 8:36 a.m. precisely, that was going to happen to you unless you logged out. So most people probably didn't start by 8:36, or if they did, the fact that they were being told this only added stress to an already stressful situation. They then had to log out and log back in, which already is not something you want to do in the middle of the SAT.
right.
But it wasn't as simple as I'm out, I'm back in 30 seconds later, which, by the way, is unfair anyway, because you lost 30 seconds. It was a whole process. The proctor would have to go around one by one, logging people back in. And once they got back in, the clock had continued running.
Right,
So if they had 20 minutes left by the time they got back in, maybe they had 9 minutes left.
right,
So
right,
their math score is going to be completely artificially lowered, and it's just not fair at all.
right. So they're going to have to take it again.
Yeah, they're offering a makeup test, but it's hard for high school students to find a free Saturday morning with all their activities and sports and finals, vacation. It's right around spring break for a lot of these kids.
Right.
And not to mention they were ready to go on Saturday, March 8th. Who's to say that they're going to be ready in 2 weeks? They're going to lose momentum. They may have already used up any tutoring budget they might have.
Right.
So and then or they might want to continue tutoring with me, but my schedule might be booked and it's like I can't fit you in now. Sorry, I know you prepped for that test, but it affects a lot of things.
Yeah. Yeah. Nothing more than the mental unpreparedness, right? You're really preparing for something really different at a different time, and you were thinking something. Got it, Steve. And Steve, I'm sure from a process point of view, from your methods, a lot of things must have you must have changed just to accommodate the way SAT is transformed from pen and paper to digital. So, what are some of those changes that you forced changes for you to kind of continue the preparations like the way you
Not,
used to do?
yeah, not too much in terms of teaching style, other than as I was saying, the Desmos calculator, and that's been very recent. Like more, it's the kind of thing where I will tell a student, I wasn't even talking about this 2 months ago, but
Right.
here's what you should do in this question. That's the biggest one for sure. The other one is honestly not so much because it's a digital test, but just because I know they've changed a lot of the content. So there are different kinds of questions, different areas of emphasis in algebra. So I emphasize certain types of problems more so because they just change the kind of question they're asking, not necessarily because it's digital. But I also do let students know about the adaptive nature of it. And again, it's so not transparent, but it's very clear that if you don't get the hard second module in reading,
Right.
writing, your score is very, very capped. There's some kind of a ceiling put on it, I'm sure, that will
Yeah.
make it very hard to get anywhere near 600 if you're getting the easy module. Even if you get everything right on the easy module, it
Yeah.
barely will score at all. And the flip side to that is get the hard module, you can do pretty terribly, and it sets some kind of a floor, I think, for your score. So
That's right, Steve. And probably initially they got to get at least 70% of the easy questions right for them to be able to access the hard one.
it seems like that's the unofficial number. Right around 70% is what I tell people too. Yeah. But nobody knows.
Right. And what about the English reading size? Longer or shorter? Are you happy? Not happy?
Oh, I'll tell you what I don't like about it. And it's similar to what teenagers would say. Why am I reading something from 400 years ago? Why am I reading a
Right.
why am I reading a 5th century poem? Why is that testing my knowledge of reading comprehension? Which
Right.
could just as easily be done with something written in the last 20, 30, even 100 years. So that to me seems a little strange.
Got it. And nothing to do with the size at all?
No, I think I'm okay with the fact that it's one question, one passage. I think that's all right. One thing I do advise my students a lot is the middle of the reading section gets a little more technical, a little denser. Sometimes there are charts involved supporting a hypothesis. I often tell people once you see the questions starting to get a little bit longer, skip ahead to the punctuation, grammar questions, get those all out of the way. Now, the SAT says the questions are not weighted equally, but again, we don't know how they're doing that. So I would rather a student run out of time on one very long chart question in the middle
Right.
instead of having to guess on the last 6 questions that they probably could have gotten right, or at least could have done quickly.
Got it, Steve.
So that's something that I would not, that's something I couldn't do before because reading was its own section, writing was its own section on the paper SAT.
Right. Right. And what about the act following SAT in the changes and going digital?
Oh, they are very not transparent. They have not done much at all in terms of letting people know what to expect, other than here are the new time limits. Here is the new number of questions. Um, the reading passages will be shorter, but they haven't put out like a real practice test yet. Until they said they're not going to do it until April. Guess when the first one's going to be offered officially? April. So,
April. Yeah.
yeah, great. So they're giving me the practice test pretty much the day of the real test. So it's kind of they're not very clear on the instructions either. Science is optional
Right.
starting starting in April if you take it online, but it's not optional if you do it
Option.
on paper.
Right.
Which I don't understand that one either because how hard is it to just literally tear pieces of paper out of the back of the booklet and say, "Don't do these questions." So they're very unclear about that and how the scoring will go if you want to super score a paper test with the science and then a future test without it. Like which scores are getting presented to colleges? They're not as clear as they could be. And they're not very uniform in it. They should have basically just waited until it was ready to be you can do science on paper or digital or not. The staggering of when you can do things is really making things a lot more difficult than it needs to be.
Has this increased the SAT enrollments?
Yes, a lot. And it surprises me. It's my business is now probably between SAT and ACT, it's probably 85% SAT,
Oh, wow. Okay.
15%. Yeah. And then before that, it was maybe about 70-30. And there's a geographic bias towards the SAT just because that was always the test offered in the Northeast, Pennsylvania, Northeast United States, Philadelphia included. And parents seem to hold on to that bias. Like we never took the ACT. I want them to take the SAT.
Right.
No matter how many times I tell them there's no real difference between the SAT and the ACT. Colleges on both of them favorably, they don't really care. But people in the South are probably, and the Midwest might run into a different issue where the ACT was the common test.
Right. Right.
The reason I'm so surprised is back in 2016, I think it was, when the SAT made its first real big changes, it went the other way. Like people were like, you know what? I know what the ACT is. Why don't I stick
Right.
with that?
Right. Right.
Yeah. So that's what I expected to happen. Where a lot of people would just say, until we know what this digital SAT is all about, I'm going to take the ACT. And that's not what happened at all. It surprised me very much. So that's what happened, surprisingly.
But now that the ACT is going digital, people are thinking in that same way to just shift to SAT till it stabilizes.
I think so. And I think until they have more clarity on what the new ACT looks like, that's what I'm telling them. Although I kind of said, you should consider the ACT because nobody really knows what the digital SAT is going to be like. But people liked it. I think people were attracted to the shorter test duration too, and
Right.
that's what's going to happen with the ACT. It is shorter, so maybe that will get some people back. The optional science section might get some people to take the ACT.
Do you think shorter is equal to easier?
It's I think on the ACT it will be because I always found the ACT as a teacher and as a test taker way more straightforward in the reading. In the English is very similar to the SAT, but the reading is way more straightforward and it's
Right.
way more modern. There's rarely a passage that's over 20 years old. So most of the time it's find this information, it's in there, just keep looking, you'll find it. Less inferential type questions. The problem was always the time pressure. You just had to be super fast and you just had to sprint start to finish. Same with the math. Same with the science, I found too. So if they alleviate a little bit of that time pressure, suddenly the one real big negative I found in ACT has now been removed. So I think it really will be easier if they don't adjust the difficulty of the questions and they really just say, you now have more time per question.
Right. And the eastern part of the US is set to have, a little more support for the ACT. But what I'm hearing from you is not the case. It's 85% SAT now and 15% SAT. But even before that, it's 70-30.
Yeah.
But yeah, tutors are having a hard time convincing parents to take the ACT because some of them really believe that ACT gives you. Okay, one of the tutoring centers that I spoke said that 70% of their high scores came from the ACT and not from the SAT.
Okay.
Yeah, so I wonder.
Surprising.
Oh, is this surprising?
If it's much more ACT than SAT, yeah.
Right. I mean, most of the high scores have been coming from ACT, and there's been a dip in high scores in SAT ever since SAT went digital.
Yeah, that's what I expected to happen, but around here, as far as my clientele, it's not happened at all. It's almost like they asked me for SAT. I mentioned it in my welcoming email. You should consider the ACT too, but for the most part, they just want to go SAT.
Got it, Steve.
I
And
wonder if that'll, I wonder if that'll change again after this. What happened on Saturday? Because once the ACT goes digital, maybe it won't, but at least once the ACT is on paper, it's way less likely for something like that to happen. It can happen. It has happened where a proctor gets the time wrong somehow, but it's, one person in one classroom in one state in the world, not a global problem.
Right,
I mean, when
right.
this is happening in Vietnam and in my backyard, something's wrong.
Got it. And at mainline test prep, do you offer only virtual classes or do you also offer in-person classes? What's the
In
majority?
in person tutoring. So if students are local to Philadelphia or somewhat local, like I'll have kids travel an hour or so to meet with me in person, but the online option is always available, whether they're local or not.
Got it, Steve. Steve, you mentioned you use test innovators as part of, you know, your preparation. So what is it that you use it for exactly? What does
It,
it
it
offer?
offers, it offers students thousands of practice problems, 10 additional digital practice tests. One of the main reasons I wanted to use it was I found this, and so did a lot of my students, that the practice SATs offered by the College Board, the same College Board that writes the real SAT, were easier than the actual SAT, which is
Right.
very problematic because why would that be the case? I don't know. I know personally the week going into the SAT that I took it in May of last year. I was doing way better on the math than I did on the real thing. Now, part of that might have been just getting used to having to take a digital test in a classroom setting and not managing my time, but the questions were much harder, I thought, which I thought was strange. And test innovators thought the same thing, and they made their hard math problems really hard to match the difficulty of what was being asked on the SAT in the real thing. I also like it because it allows students to do practice problems throughout the week. It allows me to check their progress. It allows parents to check their progress. If a student says, "Oh yeah, I've been using it all week," I can pull it right up and say, "No, no, you haven't actually," because I can see. So it's
Right.
to keep them honest.
Got it, Steve. And how many practice tests do students typically take before the main day?
It varies, but I'll have some students that'll take two a week, which I think is a lot. Because
Right.
there aren't
Two a
that many.
week for how many weeks? For
For
8 weeks.
4 or 5 weeks, but they run out of tests at some point. Most students will take two or three before the real thing. I think they should do more than that, but sometimes it's just hard to have them find the time in their schedule.
Got it, Steve. And if you think there's one thing that could make test innovators even better, what do you think that would be?
A better ACT product, actually. I find their SAT materials are very good, but I find the ACT materials are just not even close. They don't match the real test as much as the SAT materials match the real test. So they kind of, if they could expand their ACT offering, it would be a way better product, I think.
Got it. But the ACT you're talking about was like even for the old pen and paper ACT, you were practicing it on a digital platform, is it?
Some of it was. A lot of it, there are so many more practice ACTs out there because they haven't changed the format yet. So it
Right.
was so much easier to just have students use either parts of old tests or full old tests as practice. So I never really ran out of ACT materials because there are probably like 30 or 40 old tests within the last 10 years floating around out there.
Got it, Steve. Steve, moving on to a little bit of a business side of things about how you built mainline test prep, what remains to be your top way of acquiring students?
I think it's hard to say. A lot of it is word of mouth still.
Yeah, that's what everybody say. Yeah,
Yeah, it seems old fashioned, but the longer I've been in business, the more known I am. So
right.
that is generating its own momentum. So when parents talk amongst themselves about the SAT, my name will come up on certain like parent web pages, neighborhood Facebook pages. My name will come up. They find my website too, and they contact me that way. But it's rare that somebody just contacts me without saying so and so mentioned your name or I found your name here. So that a lot of it is that. This year I won Best of Philly, which is a big deal, I guess. Turned out to be a bigger deal than I thought. Um,
Congratulations, Steve.
Magazine, thank you. Philadelphia Magazine always does their Best of Philadelphia awards, and I won the SAT tutor, and it definitely has made a difference in the demand. And to me, that's the biggest difference. I think that propelled so much more demand. I don't think it's a lot of people wanted to take the SAT all of a sudden because of digital SAT. I think it's just my name got out there way more.
Got it. Have you tried any of the internet marketing, paid marketing, or there has been no need for it yet?
Not too much. The only advertising I really tend to do is in a couple of the local school newspapers,
Right,
sponsorships of like events, and then we have Patch. I don't know if Patch is a worldwide thing or it's like a neighborhood. It's a newsletter based on different neighborhoods, so it just sort of gives students, not students, just community news, events, listings, and then some advertising. So I advertise there, and that's all digital.
got it, Steve. I'll probably conclude with this. Given that ACT is becoming enhanced ACT, what's your general advice to parents or students listening, and even to tutors maybe, as to how to deal with uncertainty?
Um, I'd say be patient and find out more about what's going to happen in April because that's the first one. I've been telling students about the science section. Excuse me. Take it if it helps your score. If it's really hurting your score, don't take it. Don't feel the need to take it because it is optional unless a
Right,
school or a program in which you're interested in is going to want you to take it. In other words, like if you're applying,
right,
if you know you're like going to be a theater major somewhere, I don't think it matters if you take science or not. I don't think a school is going to decide your admission criteria based on, oh, he didn't take science, why not? But if you're necessarily looking at very high tech places, if you're applying to Caltech, MIT, and you know you want to be a biomed major, then it might make sense to take it. And hopefully, because you're interested in that, it's something in which you're good. So you should take it in that case. So I mean, some of my advice is still based more on not so much on the digital versus non-digital, but the do you want to take science or do you not want to take science? The
right.
digital part of it, we'll see what it looks like, but they're really dragging their feet on letting students know what it's going to look like. The ACT's done that before, though. The ACT was supposed to make a big change a couple years ago, and they never did. And it was once you've taken the whole test, you can show up and just take one part and then go home. And that
That's how it
never
is with
happened.
the SAT, right?
No, SAT, you still have to sit for the whole thing. You can
Oh,
super
right, yeah,
score.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But you
An
can
ACT,
pick and choose which sections marks to show from which test.
an ACT you can not as much, but the ACT actually does do that on their score report. So they're definitely leaning towards super scoring. But the ACT was ready to say once you've done a full test, from now on you can just show up and take your 45-minute section and go home and use that score. But they never got it off the ground. A lot of that was because of COVID. They
Right,
never revisited that, and that would have been a really nice, convenient way for students not to waste a whole Saturday, not to have to like study for sections in which they've already done well. They could just literally say, "I'm here for math today, 60 questions, 60 minutes. Okay, I'm done. I'm home." But they never got it off the ground. So
but what if
it,
you just took your section and left
you
without
can't.
it?
Yeah, you have to sit there for the whole thing. And sometimes students say, "Does it matter if I do poorly?" I say, "Well, it looks bad. I mean, a school
Oh,
shouldn't
right,
care
yeah.
if they're scoring, but you don't want to just." Sometimes students go, "Can I really just take a nap during a section?" I go, "Why? You're already there. Why not try your best? Because you might do better, and it would look a little strange, I think, if you just tanked a section just to get to the section where you're trying to improve."
Right. Got it, Steve. Steve, thanks so much for your time. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Yep, thank you. Sorry we had so many difficulties at first, but glad we got this done.
Oh, no problem at all.